Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be discussing On Philip the Fair, which is the second essay from Evolar's Metaphysics of Power. And once again, we're going to be working from the Arctos edition. Now, these are intended to be standalone presentations, so you don't have to watch them all in order, but I do recommend, if you haven't already, that you go back and have a look at The Decline of the Idea of the State at some point, because it's a very thorough analysis of the general principles that we'll be discussing as we go forth. Before I get started, I must say that I'm indebted to Apostolic Majesty, absolutely fantastic history channel with all kinds of great stuff. And I watched, in order to prepare myself for this presentation, I watched his streams on the Capetian dynasty and Guelphs and Ghibellines, which had a lot of great context for the sorts of things that Evolar's discussing in this essay. Okay, so let us refresh ourselves on involution, the regression of the castes. This being the core concept we're discussing, and today we'll be looking at one small phase in this regression of the castes. So civilization is composed of four principal castes. Over time, political authority descends through the castes. This cycle is characterized by four distinct ages. Each age is defined by the nature of the caste which holds political authority within it. This is a process of decadence and decomposition in which the lower is derived from the higher. As power descends, there occurs a corresponding atrophy of human capabilities, and the social organism deteriorates. And this is a cycle of decadence. This is not a progressive view of history. This is a cyclical view of history, which has an inbuilt image of decline, which we're discussing here. So we begin in the Golden Age, where we have full integration of human capabilities, the total organism, both monarch and state. So everything that is available to a human is available to the entire social organism in the Golden Age, where everything is fully integrated. This process of decadence and decline has not yet begun. And this process begins with the age of priests, where we see the suppression of virility. This is what is disintegrated. This is what is amputated from the whole. No man can be at once king and priest. So the monarch is no longer a warrior priest at the top. He is now a priest, and the warriors are subordinated to priestly authority. And this emphasizes the herbivorous aspect of life, as I said last time. And we see a corresponding loss of impetus and will, both in the social organism as a whole and in the individuals who compose it. Next up, the Age of Warriors, which is what we're discussing today. Here we see desacralized temporal power. This is the predatory aspect of life coming to the fore, and we see a loss of restraint and supernatural legitimacy as the warriors overwhelm the priests and surrender the idea of sacred power, settling purely for temporal power. Then comes the Age of Merchants, where the ancient privileges are revoked, and they're replaced by a written constitution designed to facilitate perfect economic stasis. This is the vegetative aspect of life. And here we see, ironically, a loss of stability, even though the merchants want a perfectly stable system in which to conduct their organic economic processes. In actual fact, they lose stability because the new is unstable relative to the old, right? Something is stable because it's ancient. It's proven its stability through eons and eons. These ancient privileges were in themselves spontaneous organic social organization, right? The hierarchy is actually the norm. The hierarchy is not the aberration. This then leads on to the Age of Peasants, where we see the denial of a particular way of life. This is the collective, cellular aspect of life. Service as a response to persistent chaos and material inequality. And we can say this is the slave life, in the traditional sense of the word. We're not talking explicitly about a kind of political relationship where one person owns another person. We're talking about the idea of not living by one's own law, this being the traditional definition of slavery. In the Age of the Peasants, no one lives by their own law because we've denied a particular way of life. Everyone has become a servant to the pre-personal collective. As I said, today we're discussing the Age of Warriors, so we will briefly run through this slide from the last presentation as well. So this is referred to as the Titanic Retaliation, the Promethean Revolt, the age in which the warriors revolt against the priestly authority, which has come to deny virility and to suppress it. And here we have Prometheus, the myth. I think I said he was being having his liver picked out by a vulture last time. I think it's actually an eagle, so that's a correction. But in the Age of Warriors, the warriors seize temporal power. They surrender supernatural authority in an attempt to usurp the priests. Power is virile but desanctified. The abandonment of the sacred is the second act of decadence. All spiritual distinctions between the sovereign and the various feudal princes evaporate. We'll see this later on. He allies himself with the merchants and supports their demands against his rivals in the nobility. Absolutism and centralisation define the introduction of the national system. Here is our main character for today, and he is very much a main character, I must say, Philip IV of France, or Philip the Fair, 1268 to 1314. So, he is, in short, a concrete example of the Promethean revolt, the second stage of decay outlined in the theory of involution. And we see him here in this painting, great painting from which I've stolen from Apostolic Majesty's stream. But he's represented here in his chainmail. He's holding his sword, about to pull it out of his scabbard, and his coat of arms is all over him. There's not a cross in sight, so I think this image very accurately captures his oeuvre, if you will. He is not a man who is subordinate to the church. He is a man out for himself and his own temporal power. His reign is characterised by constant conflict against rivals, both internal and external, and this is a situation he inherits to a certain degree. So it's not just Philip the Fair causing all these problems. He is living in an age where these sorts of things are happening, and he is a character who exemplifies this kind of decadence without being the sole executor of it. We see him leveraging his ancient privileges, acting without restraint, breaking traditional bonds and limits on royal jurisdiction. So these ancient privileges, which will eventually be revoked by the merchants, part of the reasoning for it is the fact that characters like Philip IV are using them whilst failing to act with the sort of royal restraint that is expected of them. As things come apart, you see responsibilities being detached from powers. This age is characterised by secularisation, destruction of feudal estates, centralisation and absolutism. And we see Philip IV engaging in debt, expropriation, currency devaluation. Gold as the destroyer of aristocratic patronage. I'm also indebted to AA here. He recommended this book, Medieval Feudalism by Carl Stevenson, which is absolutely fantastic, a lovely little read, with lots of great context again for this period and the sorts of things we're discussing. I've selected a quote here which is very relevant to what we're talking about. He says, quote, "Feudal institutions, as we have seen, arose under and generally presupposed an agrarian organisation of society. Thanks to feudal tenure, a ruler in the early Middle Ages could obtain a force of expert cavalry, garrison his castles, and provide for all ordinary needs of government without the expenditure of cash. Once that monopoly was broken, feudal arrangements would cease to be necessary. When supplied with money from new sources, a prince would naturally prefer to hire troops and officials in order to increase his personal control of the army and civil administration." End quote. So this is exactly what Philip IV did, and we'll see this playing out with these various parts of society and his relationship to them. This is what Evola describes. He describes all of the various interactions he has with the existing feudal structure and how he pulls it apart piece by piece. So first up, Evola mentions the Jews, who have made a vertical relationship with the sovereign in this era, as is so often the case, providing certain services which are not permitted to the Christians or the Catholics in the social organism. The Jews come in and are provided protection by the sovereign. And Evola has a fantastic quote to describe what's going on here, referencing back, I think, quite well to Carl Stevenson. He says, quote, "The statist Moloch, having ever greater need of its golden food, Philip the Fair saw fit to furnish it by taking gold from those to whom his own system had made it most massively flow. We are speaking once more of the Jews, and this is why in 1288 the king interdicted every power which the church possessed over the Jews. They were to become his own thing, his special reserved quarry. So conventionally, usury was prohibited at this time, but every rule has an exception. And as we said, it was permitted with special royal protection until that protection was suddenly revoked. So Philip revoked the relationship that the Jews had formed with the sovereign, and all of the money which had flowed to them as professionals or as being experts in certain professions which handled money, this new era where cash overwhelmed the old feudal system. Philip decided he wanted that money, and the result was expropriation and expulsion. He stole all of their money and he kicked them out. And this wasn't some kind of great result for the Catholics either. Philip snubbed the nobility in favour of the burghers. A centralised court of bureaucrats replaced the feudal system of distributed partial sovereignties. Philip inherited all of the debts owed by the Christians, and he didn't forgive them. He pursued them even more zealously than the Jews had. He also took personal control of tax collection through his bureaucracy, something which had also been handled by the Jews. And judging by some of the things that I've read, he was again far more aggressive in this policy than the Jews ever were. He also went on to borrow money from whatever source he could find via collateral loans. So not usurious loans, these were permitted Catholic loans where you would offer up collateral in order for money. And there's a recurring pattern where lending money to Philip the Fair seems to be a pretty bad idea and you end up in prison or dead. All credit and all debt had a single locus, the king. Unsurprisingly, this led to falsification of currency at the royal level, creating inflation, further exsanguinating the Christian population. So this was a disaster, basically, for the ordinary Christians. Whether you were lending money or not, Philip the Fair was basically using his privileges, using his power, his new temporal power, to just concentrate money and steamrolling anyone in his way. So acting completely without restraint. Next up were the church in Philip's crosshairs. He increased church tithes with papal assent. He leveraged his power to levy special taxes on church property, and there's a lot of very valuable church property with a lot of wealth in France at the time. This was an emergency measure which Philip wished to make permanent, so some real echoes through time there. This seems to be the conventional form of government these days, to operate in a permanent state of emergency. He prevented the clergy from holding political power or administering justice, quote, reserving such men to the government of spiritual matters. So I spoke last time about this idea of the separation of church and state being something that occurs more than once in the cycle of involution, and in this instance, Philip decided that the church was so valuable administering completely spiritual matters that they didn't need to have any temporal power at all. That was all for him. So again, upsetting the balance, upsetting the system of partial sovereignties. He then arrested the Pope, which is a power move, it has to be said. And unfortunately, Boniface VIII died in custody and was posthumously accused of heresy and sodomy by his successor, Clement V, who moved the papal court to Avignon. So we see here, as we said, the warriors seizing temporal power. We see Philip IV completely dominating the spiritual authority of the church and totally desacralizing power. Then the Templars, who were an ancient crusader order, very wealthy. They provided banking services, protection. They're sort of a private military force and an initiatic brotherhood. So something very close to Evola's heart, this idea of you join these special secretive organizations, these esoteric organizations, and you become someone else. That's what it means to be an initiate. You leave your old life behind and you become something new. And the Templars had a lot of prestige in this regard, having this long history of being something different, completely different to other parts of the social organization. Although Evola does hint at the fact that there had been some decay in the Templars, unsurprisingly, this being an age of decline and decay. And it's the usual Philip the Fair playbook. He took loans, he declared heresy, he expropriated their wealth, and then he burnt the leaders at the stake. And Evola says that Philip, having abandoned the aristocracy as the foundation and guarantor of regality, saw in this ancient crusader order nothing more than an obstacle to his temporal power. Quote, the highest vocation of Ghibellinism fell into the sunset together with this idea. And so we can run through the charges that Evola lays at Philip the Fair's feet here. Ghibelline emperors saw themselves as divine. Philip saw only temporal power. So again, referencing back this Ghibelline idea, this is the imperial faction which contested a power struggle between the papacy and the Holy Roman Empire in medieval Italy in the 12th and 13th century. And if you want some more background on this, you can go and watch Apostolic Majesty's stream, which is excellent. Quote, in Philip the Fair, those forces first took definitive form, which would substantially provoke the disintegration of medieval civilization and propitiate the birth of modern civilization. So Philip has abandoned the old ways. He's abandoned the traditional path and set us on the path to modernity, in essence. It goes back far further than we might have imagined. It goes back to the 12th and 13th century, in essence. And we have the replacement of feudalism, knighthood, and papacy with desacralized bureaucracy as a result. The replacement of aristocratic patronage with liquid capital. And Evola calls him a shyster, a bankrupt, and a counterfeiter. As we've said, modern civilization is, in a sense, catalysed by these sorts of things that Philip IV is getting up to. So there are echoes through time here. And quoting Guénon, Evola claims that it was no wonder that France had the first revolution as a result of the fact that these events occurred in France. In every epoch, absolutism has always prepared the way for demagoguery. So the modern political condition is a consequence of the absolutism of the early modern period, the Renaissance period, or the lead up to the Renaissance period here. Totalitarianism today is a response to the literalistic and democratic chaos derived from the revolutionary era, a centrifugal tendency of general dissolution, which would in the end sweep away every institution, political authority, and tradition. So things have got worse, okay? It's not the case that it stopped with modernity. The totalitarianism today is not a deviation from the true path, a sort of error that's occurred. It is a natural outcome of the kind of decadence and decay represented by the regression of the caste, the regression of political authority through the caste. And this means as well that modern critiques of royal power are not completely baseless. Why shouldn't the Commons defend itself against this tyranny? Right, we sort of have this idea that everything was going, well, sometimes we talk as if everything was going great and then a load of libtards turned up one day and just ruined everything. And that modern critiques of our way of thinking are completely retarded and without any kind of base whatsoever. But actually they're not, because of these things that have happened in the past. It wasn't all going great and then everything suddenly went wrong one day. There is a clear path of decay and decadence which started a long time ago, and these critiques have some grounding, it has to be admitted. So if we go back to this slide from the decline of the idea of the state presentation, I've just highlighted a bit here that says, in the age of peasants, the final age of totalitarianism, the era of the slaves, right? There exists a hatred of higher forms to which obedience was previously justified and sacred. So obedience is no longer justified, not because the peasants have got something wrong, necessarily, right? The thing to which the obedience would be justified has given up its legitimacy. That's what's happened, right? The fish rots from the head down. That's why there is a hatred of higher forms, because the higher forms have failed. And we can see here, with the living constitution completely out of control, it's easy to see why the merchants would seek to revoke the ancient privileges and impose a system of universal rights. The monarch here, or the warrior here, Philip IV, the way he's behaving is the antithesis of the sort of stability required for predictable management of the economy, which is what the merchants want to do. There's no reason for the ancient privileges to be upheld because the warriors have abandoned the sacred anyway and are acting in a way that's completely antithetical to them. Right? They're not acting in a way that says they deserve these privileges anymore. So why would they be given? Why would they be respected by the merchants? The merchants have other priorities, and the warriors are now getting in the way of those priorities and creating chaos. And then subsequently we have democratic chaos, which ensues as the peasants begin to pull the system apart from below. They are unable to grasp the intricacies of total management. They're not merchants, they're peasants. and they interpret universal rights within the frame of duty, service, and fairness. So when they hear universal rights, they think that it means that they get their due, right? But actually, no. The merchants only recognise duty to the proper flow of liquid capital. They have a different idea of what universal rights mean. The peasants are chaotic and disruptive, but easily manipulated. Totalitarianism is the result. Management of men replaces management of the economy. The merchants end up having to move towards totalitarianism in order to control the peasants who are trying to reinterpret what these universal human rights are, what they mean to them. And the worker thinks, like, understandably, why shouldn't the worker enjoy the fruits of his own labour, right? This is a reasonable question to ask at this point, once you've destroyed the ancient privileges, once you've given up the idea of natural authority and the living constitution. And then it's not too much of a leap to a darker interpretation that says, why shouldn't the worker become a maximally allocated unit of production in service to the collective? In this way, work sets us all free from the tyranny of human interiority, and we decline down into the age of peasants, into the age of slavery. Okay, thank you very much for listening, and we'll be back with the next one next time.